In today's video, we're going to talk about kids who have more friends than we can count. I don't know why, but the calmness of these little bastards in the face of terror always scares me. So already like and subscribe. Let's go to the video. It was a scorching summer when my wife, Lila, our son, Andy, who was just turning 6, and I moved to a worn-out ranch-style home on Ravenwood Drive. The house had a retro look, straight out of the 70s with those old shaggy carpets and wooden paneling on the walls. But it was spacious, and with the price we got, it was a steal. A couple of weeks in, and Andy started talking about his new friend, Ben. At first, it seemed like typical kid stuff. Probably just a way to cope with the new surroundings, I thought. But the stories about Ben started getting specific. Andy would chat about how Ben wore old-fashioned clothes, like suspenders and a straw hat. "Daddy, Ben told me he used to play by the old well at the back when he was little." Now, this caught me off guard. We did have an old boarded-up well in the backyard, but we hadn't shown it to Andy. One evening, after Lila made her famous meatloaf, I went to call Andy for dinner. Walking past his room, I overheard him laughing and chatting. Peeking in, I found him alone, playing with his toy cars. "Who were you talking to, buddy?" I asked. "Ben. He was showing me how to make the cars go faster." The tales of Ben started becoming a daily routine. He would talk about the old treehouse, the barn that once stood where our garage was, and even about a pet dog he lost. Lila and I started getting concerned. This wasn't just an imaginary friend. This felt eerily detailed. Out of curiosity, I decided to talk to our elderly neighbor, Mr. Graham. Over a cup of coffee, he told me about a family that lived in our house in the 1930s. They had a son named Benjamin. He was around Andy's age when he tragically fell into the well and couldn't be saved. I felt a shiver down my spine. Could this be the same Ben? A few nights later, a huge storm hit Tucson. Thunder, lightning, the whole shebang. Amidst the howling winds, Andy came running into our room, terrified. "Daddy, Ben's scared. He's asking for help. He doesn't want to be in the well anymore." Lila and I exchanged nervous glances. The next morning, after the storm settled, I approached the old well. Uncertain of what I was hoping to find, I carefully removed some of the boards. As I peered down, to my astonishment, I spotted something. An old rusty toy car. Feeling a mixture of fear and compassion, Lila, Andy, and I decided to hold a small ceremony, placing flowers in the toy car near the well, hoping to offer Ben some peace. Weeks turned into months, and the mentions of Ben gradually faded. Andy, now engrossed with school and new friends, spoke less of his old imaginary mate. However, every year on that stormy night, we still place a fresh bouquet of flowers near the well. The story of Ben served as a stark reminder of the threads that connect us to history and the human essence that lingers long after we're gone. Sometimes closure is all that's needed, even for a lost soul. Me and my wife Melanie and I had been searching for a perfect place to start a family. We had our little boy Jake, who was 4 and filled with boundless energy and imagination. The old sprawling home with its expansive backyard and enormous fireplace seemed ideal. But Jake wasn't alone in his games. Barely a week after moving in, he started talking about Anna. "Anna doesn't like the cold," he said one frosty morning, watching his breath fog up the window pane. Melanie and I exchanged amused looks. "And who is Anna, buddy?" I asked. Jake looked at me, his innocent blue eyes serious. "She's my new friend, but she's sad because her daddy wasn't home a lot." Over the next days, Anna's story began to unfold through Jake's conversations. She was around Jake's age and loved playing hide and seek. But there was a recurring theme: her loneliness and a deep-rooted fear of the house's grand fireplace. It was Melanie who pieced the story together first. Through some conversations with our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, we learned about the tragic history of our house. Back in the early 70s, a man named Richard lived there with his daughter, Rebecca. With Richard's frequent travels, Rebecca was left alone. One cold winter's day, a fire broke out. By the time the flames were doused, Anna had vanished. Later, her tiny body was found in a closet where she had tried to escape the smoke, but tragically suffocated. The weight of the story settled heavily upon us. We contemplated moving, but finances and a sense of attachment to the house held us back. things took a stranger turn during a particularly frigid winter evening. I lit up the fireplace, and the entire family cozied up in the living room. Suddenly, Jake looked at the closet door adjacent to the fireplace, his face pale. "Anna doesn't want the fire. She's scared," he whispered. A cold wind gusted through, despite all the windows being shut. The flames from the fireplace flickered violently and then, with a whoosh, went out completely. The room became eerily silent, the only sound being the rapid beating of our hearts. Melanie clutched Jake tightly, her eyes wide with terror. We decided to spend the night at a hotel. As I locked the front door, I thought I heard a soft whisper. "Thank you." Life in New Orleans was always steeped in history, folklore, and tales of spirits. I've been living in the heart of the city, managing a local bookstore for years. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I read my newspaper and sipped my coffee, my daughter, Lily, then 6, sat at the dining table with her crayons. "Daddy, this is Mr. Gray," she announced, showing me a drawing of a tall, slender man in an old-fashioned suit. I looked at the drawing and smiled. "He looks very dapper. Is he one of your new friends?" Lily nodded. "He likes the nighttime and tells me stories about the stars." I didn't think much of it. Kids have imaginary friends. But over the next few weeks, Lily introduced more. There was Miss Opal, an older woman in a flowing dress who sang lullabies. And then there was the Whisperer, a shadowy figure who would tell Lily secrets. One evening, as I was making dinner, Lily tugged at my pants leg. "Daddy, the Whisperer told me something." "What did he say, sweetie?" Lily hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "He said that the world has eyes and they're always watching." It sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to Lily's vivid imagination. But things became increasingly strange. I would wake up in the middle of the night to Lily chatting away in her room. Once, I sneaked in to listen. The conversation was one-sided but intense, as though she was listening intently to someone else. One day, after closing the bookstore, I decided to take Lily out for ice cream. As we sat there, she looked past my shoulder and her face went pale. Following her gaze, I couldn't see anyone out of the ordinary. "Lily, what's wrong?" she whispered. "Miss Opal's here and she's not happy." Over the next month, I started seeing things. Flickers in my peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to linger, and every night the sound of hushed conversations from Lily's room. One evening, as I was tucking Lily in, she seemed very upset. "Daddy, they're angry. You tried to make them go away." I held her close. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe." But that night, as the whole house plunged into an unusual darkness, I felt it. An undeniable, oppressive presence. Soft whispers echoed through the hallways. The temperature dropped significantly. I raced to Lily's room, but she wasn't in bed. Panicking, I searched the house. I finally found her in the basement, standing in a circle with candles lit around her. She looked up, her eyes not her own. "They just wanted to be acknowledged, Daddy." I grabbed Lily, extinguishing the candles. As I carried her upstairs, the whispers grew louder, angry and chaotic. The next morning, I consulted a priest. We blessed the house, and I hoped it would put an end to the torment. Months passed with no incidents. Life returned to a semblance of normality, and Lily's imaginary friends were gone. Or so I thought. One evening while we were watching TV, Lily looked up. "Daddy, they never left. They're just quiet now. Waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, dread filling me. Lily just smiled. "For the right time." Scarlett, my sister, had an active imagination. As kids, I often overheard her discussing her friends. Initially, I presumed they were merely acquaintances from school or neighboring children, but over time I began to discern that I had never met these individuals. Scarlett would often reference Jack, who had a penchant for sharing adventurous tales, and young Sarah, who, in her stories, seemed to perpetually misplace items. My initial instinct was to brush off these narratives as the innocent fabrications of a child's mind. But I couldn't help but feel intrigued by the rich tapestry of details Scarlett wove into her tales. Occasionally she'd mention a place, a park, or a specific street. On a whim, I'd visit these locales, more out of curiosity than anything else. One day she spoke of a park where she'd supposedly meet Sarah. On my day off, I found myself at this very playground. It was mundane, with the usual slides and swings. I casually chatted with an elderly gentleman who was there. "Reminiscing?" he asked, observing my distant gaze. "Just thinking of old stories," I replied vaguely. He chuckled. "This place has a lot of stories. My granddaughter loses her toys here all the time." It wasn't a profound revelation, but the coincidence was uncanny. Time moved on, and Scarlett's vivid tales gradually became less frequent. We both grew up, charted our individual courses in life, and focused on our families. Those childhood narratives of hers became distant memories, occasionally revisited during family gatherings. However, one evening, a hushed conversation between Scarlett and my daughter caught my attention. When I later inquired, Scarlett brushed it off, remarking, "Just sharing stories." Yet the look in her eyes suggested a deeper narrative. There are aspects of our childhood, I realized, that remain deeply personal and are sometimes best left unexplored. Teaching in Black Pine, Nebraska, I'd always been privy to the quirks of small-town life. Over the years, I've come across many children with vivid imaginations, but Sarah's stories stood out. In our third-grade class, during breaks or free time, Sarah often talked about her imaginary friends, a motley crew of animals. There was Oliver, a rabbit who seemed wise beyond his years; May, a deer with a tranquil presence; Abel, a mischievous fox; and Grace, a delicate butterfly. Sarah described them with such details. Oliver apparently had a penchant for wandering near the old train tracks. May loved the meadows surrounding Black Pine Lake. Abel was known to play tricks near an abandoned barn, and Grace was often found fluttering around gardens in town. Initially, I thought these were just parts of tales she'd spun from books or TV shows. But the specificity with which she described their favorite spots in town caught my attention. There was an old-world charm in her stories, a simplicity from a bygone era. During parent-teacher meetings, Sarah's mother would sometimes share little anecdotes. She'd talk about how Sarah insisted on taking the longer route home just to pass by the lake or the old barn. "For May and Abel," she'd say. Or how Sarah would sit by their garden window, chatting away, claiming Grace was visiting. While some students found her tales fascinating, others grew wary, preferring to keep their distance. Children can sometimes be unkind, and whispers of Sarah and her ghost friends began to circulate. However, I always found a certain charm in her stories, a connection to the past that the modern world often forgets. One winter, I stumbled upon an old book in the school library, A History of Black Pine. Flipping through it, I came across mentions of popular spots from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. The old train tracks, the meadows by the lake, the barn, and the gardens. They all had their tales. Tales that felt strangely familiar, almost reminiscent of Sarah's stories. I never mentioned my find to anyone, dismissing it as mere coincidence. Children have a way of absorbing information, and I assumed Sarah had maybe read a similar book or heard stories from the elders.